Can you play Dune Awakening solo? Over the beta weekend and the creator beta, I've played almost 30 hours entirely alone, and today I'll be trying to assess if I think playing Dune as a solo player will be viable and, importantly, enjoyable. On the technical level, Dune Awakening is of course playable as a solo. You can load in and play on your own, you don't need to matchmake with a team or anything, but how does the game actually progress as a solo, and is the balance tilted too much in the way of guild play? Well, the beta I've played thus far, the creator beta, and the weekend beta that recently finished, both covered the early to early mid game. This is roughly the first 25 hours of progression, so we can definitely draw some information about how solo play will feel, and hopefully extrapolate some of that into the mid and late game, just based on the trends that are present in the beta. From my own initial experience, solo play is very much viable and enjoyable in the early game, perhaps slightly more beneficial than group play. Dune has a lot of things going on at once, and the best way to learn is by doing, so though it is a slower start alone, you do get to experience everything firsthand, and I think you get a better handle on the way things work. However, when you reach the early mid-game at Iron tier, things do get a bit more difficult. You'll have to take all the usual stuff you've done so far in the early game, but now you've also got a lot more resources to get your hands on, and the existing resources to keep on top of. At this stage in the game, water is, I think, going to be a bit of a pain point for solo players. Water goes from just a survival resource to being used heavily in crafting, so water is a constant use of and drain on your resources until you get into the steel tier, where the research menu has a wind trap that apparently passively generates water, though this was locked in the beta. I found myself basically having to take blood bags everywhere and constantly keep in the back of my mind that I should never come home with empty blood bags. On top of that, add the need to upgrade existing equipment, farm iron, collect flower sand, refine silicon blocks, clear camps and get intel, follow the main story, gather up rare resources for vehicles and armour and weapons, and advanced machines and items. There's a pretty sizable increase in the things you'll have to do to progress, so this stage of the game as a solo will either slow you down and will take a while, or it will force you to be very efficient with your time, which isn't always the most fun option for a lot of people. Obviously, as a guild, your demand goes up, but also your ability to produce. If you just have one guy constantly running camps getting water, that leaves the rest of your guild able to worry about the more important resources. If you have a lot of time to dedicate to Dune Awakening, I think solo play will be alright at this point, even when the resources get stretched thin. But if you're someone that works full job, has kids to look after, so on and so forth, then you might find yourself a bit short on the time you need to actually make meaningful progress as a solo. I wouldn't be surprised if this stretching of your time and abilities continues on throughout the game. That seems like the trend thus far and is probably the logical progression path. That being said, unlocks like passive water generation should help to reduce that grind and hopefully make it feel more important, rewarding and hopefully enjoyable, but as a solo there will be times where you're juggling a lot of tasks at once. That is sort of the nature of being a solo player. I don't think it gets into the territory of overwhelming in the beta, but I do worry a bit about the mid to late game if solo players aren't able to sufficiently automate the more tedious or boring parts of resource farming. Moving on to the core gameplay, PvE and PvP. I think that solo PvE will probably be pretty decent. The beta had 3 areas with a mix of different enemies, including dungeons, and they were pretty fun to run solo. Not always exactly easy, especially some of the later ones, but it didn't feel like they were scaled for guild level difficulty. In fact, I did kind of worry that some of the dungeons might feel too easy for guilds, but that's another topic altogether. Due to how easy it is to get overwhelmed and outnumbered as a solo, I did find often that I had to play pretty conservatively, utilising stealth, scouting, ability usage, and just defining the terms of engagement myself to minimise risk and maximise reward. To me, that felt decently satisfying, especially as I was basically wearing no armour given that I was wearing a still suit pretty much all the time, mainly to negate my water intake so I had more water spare for crafting. Essentially, having no armour like this does lend itself well to a more tactical playstyle. As a solo, I think you could probably be more aggressive with the right armour and weapons, but generally I think solos will have to be a bit more careful in PvE and plan ahead for how they're going to handle things. On the PvP front, I do have some worries. I didn't find any PvP fights myself during the betas, so a lot of my feedback on the PvP front will mostly be hypothetical. The main thing I worry about is the PvP hotspots in the Haga Basin being camped. Dune's PvP is fairly forgiving by the sounds of things. It's not full loot, so that should help a bit, but I played enough Ark back in the day to still kind of remember how PvP players can be at times. Say you want to hit a shipwreck and get some of the essential resources used in making armour and weapons, and then you turn up and it's camped even by a team of 3 guys, your options as a solo are very limited. Can you realistically fight 3 other players with shields, guns and swords? Probably not. The only other alternative would be to head there at times when the server population is quiet, or recycle armour and weapon drops from enemy camps, which in my experience were kinda scarce and didn't really feel worth it that much. I really see this potential bottlenecking of resources through the PvP zones being a fair problem for solo players. Each Hugger Basin server is, according to the devs, 40 players at max right now. I highly doubt the hotspots will be camped by a guild of like 20 guys, but as a solo, even 2 or 3 could stop you getting the essential resources you need, and that does kinda worry me. I don't doubt there will be other zones to get these resources in the full game, but if they're also PvP places, then my worries persist. If the only other options are to just really slowly farm these items from enemy drops, or to just buy them with Solari, the in-game currency, I can see that feeling quite miserable. The one thing that may alleviate this is the endgame. I can see the game being designed to push PvP players towards the deep desert and hopefully not make it worth their time to camp the Hugger Base in PvP areas, but also some players will undoubtedly do it just to do it. My one really big concern though is, as we've just briefly touched on, the endgame. I think you could probably get to the endgame as a solo. It might not be the fastest way to get there, but it will probably be doable and reasonably enjoyable. However, I think both the PvE and PvP endgames sound not so solo friendly, which could potentially be a problem. Firstly, the Landsrad, the PvE political endgame. As the devs explained on a recent stream, this is essentially a set of tasks every week where guilds of House Harkonnen and House Atreides will fight for supremacy by completing those tasks and earning votes in the Landsrad. Guild members who contribute can get unique rewards, and at the end of the week, the house who won the board chooses a new policy, which is essentially a server rule. Immediately, this format does kind of worry me a bit. Even if you're a fairly efficient solo player, I really wonder how much sway you can have in the Landsrad when you're going up against guilds of 5, 10, 15 people who are just farming to complete the tasks as fast as possible. Of course, if your house wins the Landsrad, then great, you'll get some new server rule for the week that could really benefit you, but I think people will actually want to be involved, not just have things happen over their head with no ability to influence it and just take the results whatever they may be. There's also all the unique rewards for actually progressing the tasks. Even if you sink a good amount of your resources into it, again, you won't really be able to compete with a good farming guild, so it does seem, theoretically anyway, possible that a solo player could be functionally locked out of the high tier exclusive rewards in the Landsrad. On the PvP endgame front, I also worry how much a solo player can really do. The Deep Desert, the PvP endgame zone, is an enormous place with a lot of players, and it will have a lot of really valuable resources like spice. If all the best loot is out there, it's going to attract a lot of people, guilds especially. If you're turning up as a solo and end up in the middle of a 20v20 fight, you're in trouble. Additionally, if you manage to get your hands on some spice or some other valuable resource, only to get ganked by a 5-man squad of rocket-spewing ornithopters, what can you really do apart from just die? Not a lot, I would think. Some of that is part and parcel of entering a PvP zone. This isn't 1v1 no healing duels in Dark Souls. The PvP zone will basically be a free-for-all by the sounds of it, and you won't always find a fair fight, nor should you go in with the expectation of finding one. From what we've heard about it thus far, it sounds like the Deep Desert will basically run on guild supremacy, and I do really wonder how a solo player can fit into that without having their chances to success reduced to the point where it's not really worth trying to interact. There are some other endgame options. Creative Director Joel has spoken a bit about players being able to act as traders, cartographers and so on, but I think most people are going to want to go with either the official endgame of the Landsrad or the Deep Desert. If solo players are functionally unable to interact with these systems because they are solo, I think that could be a pretty big impediment to just overall enjoyment of the game for those players. I am admittedly a bit concerned about just how much a solo player will be able to do. A lot of what we've discussed in respect to the endgame is, of course, hypothetical and based on what we've seen from the devs. We haven't played the endgame yet, but from the descriptions we've been given, I think it does raise some valid concerns. However, I think there are a few things the devs could do, or should do, to potentially give solo players a few more avenues without nerfing guilds into the ground. Firstly, if a solo player does want to join a guild, it should be made as easy as possible. Not everyone will have a bunch of friends they can call on to get the game, grind, and then do the endgame activities, so I think guild recruitment should be made as easy as it can be. Maybe a guild charter at every trading post, a list of guilds in your server that are actively recruiting, what they expect, and what their goals are. Some players will want to remain staunchly solo, but for those that simply don't have the means to create a guild and do want to play in a guild, advertising and joining one should be as easy as possible. Secondly, though they shouldn't be as effective as a guild, I would hope something is in place to ensure solo players aren't just entirely useless in the Landsrad. Creative director Joel Bylos did say in an interview a while ago with Pirate Software that there will be a third house added that will be a sort of balancing factor, where that third faction benefits from the race between the Harkonnens and the Atreides being as close as possible. That could be a good option for solo players. It might be a post-launch feature, but it could work to balance things out and allow solo players to have a little more influence outside the paradigm of Harkonnen versus Atreides, but if you're a solo that really wants to play it as either of the aforementioned, then that might not suffice. For solutions on the PvP front, I think it really depends how the Deep Desert is structured. If there's sort of a really high value zone that pulls in all the guilds, the rest of the map could be a little less plentiful but also less dangerous for solos. I think that could work. Entice all the guilds over to a huge battlefield where they can fight for all the best spoils, whereas the solos and small teams can fight on slightly more even terms without worrying as much about a huge gank squad showing up. There are other potential solutions for this, like a solo-only Deep Desert, but, I'm not sure if that's necessary, or if it's something the devs would even want to do. I feel like A, that could be manipulated pretty easy, and B, the Deep Desert is not meant to be a safe place, it is meant to be an uneven and dangerous zone, and I think the risk of running into a guild is one that should always be at least somewhat present. Finally, on just general progression, I'm hoping that there is a good amount of passive or automated ways to generate basic resources like water or power without the constant manual upkeep of purifying blood or farming fuel cells. It does look like that is in place based on some of the things in the research menu, and hopefully it is enough for solo players. No solo is expecting to have an easy grind-free time, it is the nature of the solo playstyle after all. You do have to do everything yourself, but the minor rigmarole of farming the most basic resources should be eased when possible. So to wrap things up, is it possible to play Dune Awakening solo? For the progression portion of the game up until the endgame, I think it generally will be. It won't always be easy, and I do have some concerns about basic resource maintenance and the PvP areas with the rare resources being camped just for the fun of griefing, but I do think the game will generally be playable as a solo. I must say, I actually rather enjoyed my time playing solo in the Dune beta. I didn't feel like my solo disadvantage was unfair, but the game will need to move with the player to ensure they're not wasting valuable endgame time gathering the same stuff they spent the past 100 hours getting in the exact same way. When it comes to the endgame, I do have some concerns about just how much you can get involved as a solo player, especially when you're in direct competition with guilds that frankly can just always do far more than you. We've not been able to play the endgame itself yet, so there is a chance Funcom have factored this in and solo endgame won't be near impossible. That's what I'm hoping for, but I am a bit concerned about it. You don't need a guild to play Dune Awakening. In fact, I think the game might be surprisingly enjoyable as a solo for the progression portion, but the endgame does concern me a bit. Though I am a big advocate of playing solo, I don't think Dune should just cater entirely to solos, just as I wouldn't want it to cater solely to guilds. This isn't necessarily an easy thing, it's a tough balancing act trying to ensure that solos feel their time and grind is respected, whilst also keeping guilds feeling the same way, and I do think that solos will always have an inherent disadvantage, that's just part and parcel of playing alone, but I would like to see the game ensure that solo players can get involved in the endgames especially, as they are arguably one of the most important aspects of the whole experience. Of course, it won't be too long until we get to see it firsthand. Dune Awakening releases on June 10th, 2025, June 5th for pre-order early access. I'm not sure solo play will be all that viable in the endgame, at least from what we've seen on paper thus far, but I do hope that I am wrong. Anyway, that will wrap us up for today. The beta weekend finished recently, and having now played close to 30 hours entirely alone, I wanted to talk about the experience and hopefully help out any other exclusively solo players to decide if Dune is going to be a good fit for them. As always, if you found this helpful, do leave a like, it helps the channel out immensely. Thank you for watching, and a massive thanks to our wonderful, esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel here on YouTube and get some exclusive perks, take a look at the new channel memberships available by clicking join just below this video. Take care, and I'll see you soon.